G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today we're going to run through a tutorial and a demonstration for how to use shared coordinates in Revit. So we've got a previous video which deals with aligning Revit models to DWG surveys. This is actually going to lead on from that session, so I recommend that you watch that or you familiarize yourself with the techniques of aligning to a survey before you proceed to this video, because that will help understand the bigger picture, because shared coordinates lead on. We're going to have a demonstration which starts about halfway through, so if you already know the gist of shared coordinates and you just want to see that, feel free to skip ahead, but probably better you watch the whole thing. And I'm not monetized, so I'm not doing it for money, it's just for your own education. So what are shared coordinates? So they're a system in Revit that can be used to establish each model's relationship to one another via the use of a coordinate system, regardless of origins. So you might have heard of them before, you might have used them before, and yeah, most people are pretty scared of them. They're quite complicated, and they do have a tendency to get quite out of control if teams don't understand how they work. So they're really important to understand for a large collaborative project. So why do we use them? So it's to avoid things like this, where models don't line up in coordination-based environments. It makes sure that we're all working in the same position, and there's no confusion as to how things should line up in the project in any particular program. Obviously Revit, it's very easy to put things in the same position by just moving them, but once you get exports to other programs such as Navisworks, it's hard to position them, and you may not be able to move them even. You may need them to come into the same position. And it can be even as embarrassing as this, the whole site just not lining up with the model. So some common symptoms that you'll be able to see when shared coordinates aren't used are things like horizontal and vertical misalignment, so being at the wrong level or not lining up in the coordinate system. Every model might use a different origin, which can lead to this, and everyone can often start in isolation of one another when they model. So the irony of the situation is that the survey is a shared document. Everyone should be working to it. So really logically our coordinates should be shared as well. So shared coordinates are the solution to this problem. And they really let you brainlessly position models once they're established. You literally just pick auto by shared coordinates, and if it's all set up, you should be able to have confidence that your models will come into the same position, regardless of which model you're linking into which model. It could be a site model, it could be a services model. Shared coordinates is always the solution. So origins don't necessarily have to match when you use shared coordinates, which is great because sometimes people don't use the same origin points because they start differently. So it won't be an issue. And in either case, just mark and track the Revit origin, even if you don't think it matters, because it's good to know where the model started from still. So a common reason why models won't line up in origin quite early on is because when a project starts up, it's pretty rare that Revit will be started in a collaborative approach. Instead, there'll be a lot of super important business meetings for the first maybe week or two of the project, and meanwhile all the CAD monkeys in the background are probably setting up their models, and sometimes communication doesn't happen between these people, in which case an origin to origin system may not be possible because maybe people started from different origins. So someone went this way and someone went that way, and then we have to come back together later and solve the problem. So the solution is shared coordinates, and it represents a single point of reference for all the other models in the project. This is sort of diagrammatically how it works. So you have all your disciplines such as architecture, structure, and services, and you have maybe a site model as well. And there needs to be a point of reference for all those, which is shared coordinates, which are able to connect the models together in relationship. But the question is how? What is the model that does this? There's a few ways to do this. So one thing that I usually say is almost never worth doing is to use a DWG survey to control shared coordinates. It's possible, but it's also very confusing, and it's very rare that there are CAD managers on BIM projects these days that are capable of handling the intense UCS and World Coordinate System understanding in AutoCAD that's required to really make this work. The only reason why it might be necessary is you may need all your documents to come together in the original survey as DWGs, and this is one way that you can be sure that's going to work. But I almost always advise against it because just the finesse of AutoCAD just isn't there. So option one is the architectural model to hold the shared coordinates. And the reason this is sometimes done is because it's the first model that's usually created. And it's often used as a starting point for other disciplines before there's a survey. So there might be common origins already existing back to this model as a point of reference. And usually the grids and the levels start in this file as well. So it becomes a bit of a reference point for everyone. So it sort of looks a bit like that. So the architectural model is where you establish the coordinates. Then they're published out to all the other models where they are acquired and then everything is aligned back to the architectural model's coordinate system. But there's some problems with this. So what if the building moves on the site? Everything needs to become relative to that building again after it's moved. What a hassle. And what if more buildings come into the project scope that are more important than this building? We probably made the wrong choice because it's a strange thing to use as our reference point, because maybe that big building is going to move less, and maybe this building is going to move more, which means it's more to coordinate. And what if the building's removed from the project scope altogether? What if this is a little shed on a defense barracks, and a massive upgrade comes in and they say, oh, forget about that shed, and suddenly your shed coordinates reference model isn't even in the project anymore. Disaster. So another option is the site. This is much more common because the world in principle can't be moved. So usually it's a clean version of the building model as well. Typically the architect models the site and the building together at the start of a project until they receive a survey where they'll probably split them apart at that point. And then they'll probably verify the site model against the survey, or they'll verify the building and the site model against the survey and then split them apart. So it usually holds property boundaries as well, which are a good way to check that things are lined up, because if the property boundary is not in the right position, usually it leads to a lot of problems because things like setbacks can be wrong. So the site model is usually quite trustworthy. So it's almost the same thing, but really just the site model is in place of the architecture model, which is pushing the coordinates to all the building, services and structure models. But again, there's some issues. So what if a new site is chosen? What if the project is resited? That site model suddenly is irrelevant. Technically, that site doesn't relate to the project anymore. And what if the survey was wrong and they need to completely re-establish the site model to something else? So these challenges are manageable, but you need a lot of team communication to realign everything on the project. So really, I think the best option is what I call a control model. So really the only purpose of a control model is to contain grids, levels and coordinates, and it has very low impact on the overall project scope. It's really just a container file. It's rarely exchanged because it only really needs to be used to align the project, and it will also have a very low file size as well, so it's very easy to exchange. And maybe it's too intense of a management system for small projects, but I have had success with it on large projects. So it's really the same thing, but instead the control model holds the coordinate system and the site model and the architecture model sit at the same level in this case. But for large projects, I always recommend this system. Anyway, it's time to actually do a demonstration to put this all in context. So we're just going to take a scenario for our demonstration. So we're going to imagine that the architect has started a building model without a survey, so they haven't set up any coordinates, they've just started modeling, and they've shared their model with the structural engineer. The structural engineers began modeling from the same origins. So they've been using origin to origin positioning between them. But meanwhile, the service engineer was off to the side and he began modeling in isolation. So he doesn't have the same origin points, so they can't use origin to origin to origin. So what happens when we get to coordination? Something a bit like this. Everyone face palms and we all have to go back to the drawing board and we all have to make our project work. So a bit of a challenge there. And it's not necessarily the engineer's fault. It's just communication. Just bad communication by all parties. Everyone's responsible. So even worse, after this, the architect receives a survey, creates their site model and aligns that to the survey, but they keep working in their building model without aligning that to their site model. And then we get to the next coordination meeting, and even worse, nothing's even lining up to the site now. Everything's coming apart at the seams. So we need to find a way to fix this. And I guess who fixes this is always the question, and it's usually the BIM lead consultant. Whoever on the project is responsible for managing the BIM is usually who will fix this process, and it's usually the architect or sometimes the lead engineer. So let's fix this using shared coordinates. So if I just jump in here, I'll just show you what's going on in Navisworks. So I've got my architectural model I've exported here, and we've got our structural model, and these two models are lined up. So they're working because of the origin to origin system. However, our services model, as I was showing you before, isn't lined up because the project base point and the origin point are at different locations, so everything's sitting off from that. So the solution from there that the architect went with is they established a site model at that point. So you can see that site model there. But beyond this, they went and changed the coordinates of the site model to align with the survey. So unfortunately, even their architectural model isn't lined up at this point. So if I just jump into my architectural model, the way that you can work before you have shared coordinates is if I link in my structural model, origin to origin, it should come into the right position. And there you go, you can see that works. So we don't need shared coordinates to work that way. However, at this point, if I want to line up my service engineer model, I have no positioning way to achieve that because origin to origin will not come into the right point. So at this point, we need to engage a shared coordinates method. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our site model where it's had its coordinates adjusted already to match the survey. I've got a tutorial in the last session that shows how that process works. I haven't moved the survey and the site too far. Really all I've done is just taken the survey 0.00 as this corner at the property boundary, and I've just rotated the site by 20.5 degrees in the project base point settings. So you can see there 20.5. So at this point, what we need to do is actually link in our models, and we need to publish coordinates to them. Because at the moment, this has a coordinate system set up. So currently, our coordinate system is called internal. If you're going to engage a shared coordinate system, I always recommend duplicating that coordinate system. So I'll just go back a step. So I'm just going to the Manage tab, and under Project Location, I'm just opening up Location and jumping to the Site tab. So if I duplicate this, usually what I'll do is call it Shared Site or Shared Coordinates. And we'll just make that our current coordinates. Okay. So because we've duplicated our site, we still have the same survey point and the same project base point. So at this point, we can start linking in models. And let's say we want to publish the coordinates to the architectural model. So we're just going to link this in auto origin to origin. And we're going to manually move the architectural model into position. So usually an easy way to do that is to use grids, typically. So I'll just cross check. It looks like this one has come into the right position, except I think in elevation, maybe it's not lining up. Yeah, so you can see that it's too low. So at the moment, our parapet is 5 meters below. So what we need to do is shift our architectural model up 5 meters. Okay, because they still had the same project origin. Okay, so now we've moved that up 5 meters. I'll just turn off my section box. So at the moment, our architectural model is sitting in the right position in the XY plane and also in the vertical plane. You can see there are 11,400, level 3 is lined up, level 2. Okay, so at this point, what we do is we go to our Manage tab and we go to Coordinates and we go Publish Coordinates. Can't publish coordinates from a model. Okay, so we're going to need to remove our internal coordinate system. Okay, so we're just going to have our shared site. So we're going to publish our coordinates, and at this point it's prompting us to pick the coordinate system in the architectural model that we want to publish our coordinates to. Usually I recommend again duplicating this system and calling it shared site and then the discipline that you're sharing it to. So this is actually being published inside the architectural model. So I usually recommend that everyone's out of the model when you do this, of the architectural model, because we're actually going to save over the architectural model by doing this. Okay, so we'll okay that. And at this point, this is now shared. So if I select the architectural model, in its properties, you'll see this setting called shared site, and you'll see that it's referencing its site at the moment. So if you click on this, you can see the options of how these things can be positioned. So you can move it to a system from the architectural model. You can record the current position as architectural shared site, which we're doing. You'll see that it says it's going to modify the link. So I'll explain that in a second. And the final option is just not to share the site of selected instance, which basically disables shared coordinates. But the last thing we need to do is typically I recommend pinning the model in place. And then the next time you save, or when you go to manage links and you go save positions, you'll be prompted by this dialog. So this is basically Revit's way of telling you that this model has been told to be somewhere else in coordinates versus where it is outside of the model currently. So obviously the right option here is to save the new position back to the link. You can obviously not save and disable shared positioning as well. If you ever see this dialog and you're not sure what to do, don't pick disable shared positioning, because chances are maybe a model's moved without you intending to move it. And this can break shared coordinates relationships quite quickly, or it can start pushing models one at a time, so the coordinate system can just get redefined every time that's a new position is saved back, especially if you're pushing coordinates back to the host of the shared coordinates. So just be really mindful of that. Ideally, you should only ever have to do this once when you first establish shared coordinates. And that's why I'm pinning the link as well, so that it can't be moved. So we're going to save position. And if you go reload from, you'll notice in this case, it actually has saved over the model without me opening the model. So that's really important to note. Okay, so we're just going to OK that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to save my site. And I'm just going to go to my architectural model, because the next thing you'll need to do is you'll need to actually set its site to current as shared, because currently its internal system will still be set. So if we go to site and we just go make current on our shared site, we should be in business. And straight away, what we can already do is we can link our site by shared coordinates. And it should come into the right position. And there you go. And you'll see that also this site understands that it's using its shared site within the site model as its positioning method. So we'll just pin the site. And because it's already the host of the shared coordinates and that relationship has been established, if I save, it doesn't prompt me to go and update the position of the site model. And we don't want it to. However, if this model gets moved, immediately I'll be prompted to go and save the position of the site model. And I don't want to do that, because that can start pushing the coordinates in the wrong direction. So we go cancel, pin it down, save. And at this point, we have two models talking to each other in coordinate system. Obviously, the next thing we need to do is actually go and do the other two models as well. And these ones are quite simple. So we'll just go back to our site model. And note that I'm always going back to my host of my shared coordinates. That's really important. You've got to use the same model to establish those relationships. So I'm just going to hide my architectural link so that I can just focus on my structural link now. So we're going to insert our structural model, but we'll do origin to origin, open. Okay, so this one's come in again. It's too low because our site's been elevated when we align to our survey. So again, in this case, we need to line up our floors. So we'll line up floor 3 to floor 3. Great. And then we'll just check our floor plan and see how we're lining up in plan at the moment. And it looks like we're lined up in plan, I believe. See, grid A is lined up to grid A, and all these grids are lined up. So that one's quite easy as well. The services model is going to be a bit more challenging because we know that one's not positioned correctly. So again, we're just going to pin, and we're going to go manage coordinates, publish coordinates. And again, same process, shared site, structural. Okay. And at that point, we can, I think we've already pinned it. So now we'll just cross-check our coordinate system is in place, which it is. We'll save, and we'll save the position back to the structural model, same workflow. And that's that model done as well. And then we go into our structural model. And obviously this would be the consultant, not the architect doing this phase. I'm just representing all the parties as they'd operate. So typically the architect would set up their shared coordinates with their building probably, and they'd probably send their site and their building at that point instead. Typically a much better workflow because it means at least one consultant is fully coordinated with shared coordinates. And then the consultants have a method of checking if the shared coordinate system is true and correct as well, by linking in the building system by shared coordinates as well. So really important. So make sure to hassle your architect if you're not an architect for them to do that for you, because that's really critical. So now we should be able to link in our site by shared coordinates. Can't see it currently for some reason. I'll just remove it and try again. Okay, let's try that again. Link Revit. Site model, shared coordinates by shared coordinates. cross check. I think some of the categories are turned off in this view. There we go. There's our site. It's just the default view settings. But now what we can do as well is we can link in our architectural model by shared coordinates too. And we'll use the architectural shared site. And there we go. We're really in business now. So everything's coming into alignment, which is great. So I think I've made the right site there. Yep. It can be a better workflow to transfer project standards as well, and take the same shared site from the site model. So if you go to site model, coordinates shared, in manage transfer project standards, and you go and transfer project info, new only, you'll actually gain a shared site in this model. So you can actually go and make shared site your current site if you want to use the same shared coordinate site amongst all your models. Typically, I think that's required if you're on a BIM 360 cloud project anyway, that workflow. So just be mindful of that as well. And obviously the last model we need to do is the services model. And obviously the more models you have, the more things you'll need to link together. But obviously shared coordinates makes that process far easier. So we'll just hide this and we'll link in our services model. This one will be quite obvious because the coordinates will be off as well. So we'll do origin to origin. We'll go into our floor plan and you'll see that our grids are all misaligned. So we've got grid A, which is misaligned because you can see they've used a different grid system, I believe. So their grid A isn't actually grid A. So what we will do is we will realign the grids. Actually, I think grid A is grid A, we just have too many models turned on. We'll just turn off architecture and structure. There we go, that makes more sense. So now what we need to do is line up our grids. So we'll line up grid 1. So we'll line up the services model. And then we also need to line up our grids in the other direction. So we use our align tool, or AL for the shortcut. Cool, and we'll go to elevation and just cross-check the vertical alignment of the model as well. Really important to do that, a lot of people forget. So at the moment, it looks like everything is lining up. 3.8, 3.8, everything's lined up, I think. Okay, so at that point, as you can guess, we go manage, coordinates, publish coordinates, and we create a new site, shared site services. And again, we'd go inside our services model and we will set our site. Actually, we will do it just so we can show that the positioning will work. So we'll save position of the link. Okay, and then we'll just, let's say we'll open our architectural model and we'll link our services model into our architectural model. And we know that definitely before they weren't coming in the right position because of the origin discrepancy. So now if we just go link Revit and we'll link on our services model by shared coordinates. We should expect that now the services will sit inside the building if we use shared site services. And brilliant, there you go. You can see our services are now inside our building in the right position. And if I just jump back into Navisworks and I take the outcome, so the NWCs that I've exported earlier, you'll see we have a fully aligned site, which is great. So everything's coming together, which is exactly what we want. So if I just say ghost out these, you'll see that our services should be sitting in the right positions in the building. So there you go. So we have a coordinatable project now, which is brilliant. So that's more or less how the process works. Obviously big projects, it'll take longer and it's more complicated, but it's the same logic in each case. Line up the models, publish the coordinates, save the position, pin the links, and you're good to go. So everyone's happy, and the project manager especially, because now the project can be coordinated and move forward. So that's pretty much it. So hopefully that sort of helps break down shared coordinates and really make them understandable and above all approachable. If you've got any comments or feedback, feel free to leave it down below. Try not to comment on my new haircut. I know it's a bit different and a bit weird. The hairdresser took a little bit too much off, but it'll grow back. Anyway, so if you're following and subscribing, thanks. And if you're not, then feel free to. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Take care. Bye.